Okay, and so the last type of tissue that we'll talk about in detail, since we've already talked about nervous tissue in depth, is muscle tissue. So there are going to be three types of muscle tissue here. And if we go over here to our map here, there's going to be skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and just as a quick note, when you're writing this out on a practical exam, make sure that you put in skeletal muscle, simple squamous epithelia, that sort of thing, to be really clear and get the full name. Okay, so smooth muscle. So these are the three different types. And let's look at some of the differences. So one thing to look for here, this right here is an entire muscle cell. Okay, this is all one cell. Here's another cell. Here's another cell. One thing you're going to notice is this thing called striations. So those are these stripes that are growing perpendicular to the length of the cell. So the length of the cell goes this way, the stripe goes perpendicular. Okay. Now with skeletal muscle, these are all your voluntary muscles, meaning anything that you can choose to move under certain circumstances. Okay. And so what you're going to notice is here's a nucleus, all of these little things, these little purple dots off to the side are nuclei. And what that means is that here's one cell, but here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nuclei. It turns out that these skeletal muscle has more than one nucleus per cell, and they're pushed off to the side. So that's a great key for recognizing this type of muscle. Cardiac muscle, exclusively found in the heart. And you may also notice this is the length of a cell. Here's another cell. The boundaries of the cells are shown by these darker lines right here, right here. These are called intercalated discs. And these are basically, if you think about it, we can't have our heart muscle cells separating from one another. So intercalated discs are a place where you have some extra cell-to-cell junctions that keep those muscle cells tightly held together so that they're not going to lose contact with their neighbor. That would be a problem for the heart. These intercalated discs also have some gap junctions embedded in them, so that's little pores that allow electrolytes or ions to move quickly from one cell to another. Now you may notice if we start here with one cell, you can see it looks like it branches. So that's another characteristic of cardiac muscle. They have intercalated discs, they're branching. Okay, and you may also notice this is the length of the cell, and we do have stripes or striations. These striations, we're going to learn about them more toward the end of the semester, but they're basically regular alignments of those contracting proteins. So they help these cells contract in pretty much one direction. Okay. And finally, the last type of muscle we have is smooth muscle. Let me go to a cartoon image of that. So here we've got skeletal on this side. You can see the long cells, the striations, the nuclei off to the side. Here we have cardiac muscle. We've got these intercalated discs, branching cells, striations, nucleus not off to the side. And finally we have smooth muscle cells. Here's one cell right here. It looks like it's tapered on each end. Your book calls this spindle shaped. Okay. We see no striations, so there's none of the stripes. The reason why is these cells can contract, but they can kind of contract in multiple different directions, so it's not just contracting in one direction. And they're also going to have nuclei that are roughly in the middle of the cell, certainly not pushed off to the side like you have with skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle, you're going to find this lining the outside of a lot of the tubes of the body. So for example, the passageways that bring air in, you're going to have smooth muscle on the outside of that. And if it contracts, it can close off those air passageways. and then if they relax, those air passageways get larger. The same that can happen with your blood vessels. There's smooth muscle around the outside of your blood vessels, and again, if they contract, it's harder for blood to get through, and if they relax, it's easier for blood to get through. Lining the digestive tubing, okay? A lot of times what's happening there as they contract is they help to kind of push food through that tubing. And the same is going to be found for the reproductive system and for the urinary system. So if we are moving on to muscle tissue, okay, there's some charts to help you out with that. Okay, so again, what is the major function of all muscle tissue? Well, that should be contraction. What are striations? These are regularly aligned contracting proteins inside of the cell, and they cause contraction in one direction. Okay. So what do striations look like under the microscope? These are stripes that run perpendicular to the length of the cell. Okay. So again, here's this chart. I encourage you to go through and fill this in based on what we've just talked about. So for example, how many nuclei are in each cell for skeletal muscle? Greater than 1. Okay. Smooth muscle, generally 1. And cardiac muscle, if you look in your book, 1, sometimes 2. Okay. Does the cell have striations? Yes, for skeletal muscle. No, for smooth muscle. And yes, for cardiac muscle. What is the shape of the cell? So for skeletal muscle, it is very long. Okay. And like a cylinder. Okay. Smooth muscle, spindle shaped. That's where it's tapered on each end. And generally smaller. Okay. And cardiac muscle, certainly smaller than skeletal. Okay. And they're going to be branched is the thing that we typically find then. Skeletal muscle, we'll find it where they're all voluntary muscles. Okay. Smooth muscle, lining the tubes of the body. Cardiac muscle, we're going to find that in the heart. So voluntary muscle, what does it cause to move? Well, generally it causes the bones to move relative to each other. Smooth muscle, it's going to be the material in the tubes, whether that be blood, digesting food stuff, urine, etc. Cardiac muscle, definitely going to help blood move through the heart. Okay. I did this because I want to show you how to do the similarities versus differences part of this. So if we look, skeletal muscle versus cardiac muscle is our first one. So let's just take these two columns. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each one of these columns and say, are they similar or are they different? Okay, so skeletal muscle has greater than 1 nucleus, cardiac muscle has 1, sometimes 2. So that's actually a difference. So skeletal usually has more nuclei than cardiac, so that's a difference. Okay, does the cell have striations? Well, both of these say yes, so that's actually a similarity. Okay, then we're going to have the shape is going to be different. Okay, and you can put in difference as well is going to be where they're found. Okay, so we're going to have voluntary muscles versus the heart. Okay, and what do they cause to move? Well, that's another difference that you put down here. So that's how you go through there and you look, use this information up here to think about what's similar and what's different between these tissue types. Okay, this is going to be important in helping you look for keywords and questions and categorize things into the right place. So as you've gone through and you've created these sorts of maps, Okay, and here's our one for connective tissue, here's our one for epithelial tissue. I'd really like to see you go back in and make some notes about what makes a simple tissue different than stratified, and then what makes simple cuboidal unique, simple columnar. Okay, same for connective tissue. At each place where you have a branch, I'd like to see you know the similarities and differences enough so that you can list what makes each bone different from cartilage. Okay, so that's what I'd like to see you go through on that portion.